My son put me in a nursing home and said, "You're a burden in my life." He took my house, so I gave him a real burden to worry about. Just so you know, this is a real story. But to protect the identity of the person who shared it, we've chosen to use fictional names. I'm so happy you're here. Stick with me until the end, and drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Should have seen it coming when James and Melissa insisted I needed to rest at a care facility after that silly fall in the kitchen. I didn't even need stitches, just a bandage and some ice. But they made it seem like I was at death's door. "Dad, it's just for a few weeks," James said, placing a hastily packed suitcase beside my armchair. "You'll get your strength back, and we'll take care of everything at home." I had never seen my son so concerned about my well-being. Not when I had pneumonia 3 winters ago. Not when I fell off the ladder cleaning the gutters last spring. Certainly not when his mother, my Caroline, passed away 5 years earlier, leaving me to rattle around in our family home alone. But suddenly, after a minor tumble that left nothing but a small bruise on my hip, he was all concern and care. I should have trusted my instincts. "I'm fine right here," I insisted, gripping the arms of my chair. "The doctor said I'm perfectly healthy for a man of 75. "It's not about health, Dad," Melissa chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. She'd never called me Dad before. It was always Harold or Mr. Wilson. "It's about peace of mind, for all of us." I looked around the living room I'd built with my own 2 hands. The crown molding I'd installed during Caroline's first pregnancy. The fireplace where I'd hung Christmas stockings for 35 years. The walls that held every memory I'd ever made. "I don't need peace of mind," I said. "I need my home." But they wore me down, like water on stone. 3 days later, I found myself sitting on the edge of a narrow bed in room 214 of Sunny Meadows Retirement Community, a place that was neither sunny nor meadow-like. Just a beige building with beige walls and the lingering smell of cafeteria food and disinfectant. "Just temporary," James had promised as he wheeled in my suitcase. "Just until you're back on your feet." I believed him. God help me, I believed. My own son. The first week wasn't so bad. James visited twice, brought me a checkers set and some books. Melissa called once to ask if I needed anything. My grandson Tyler even stopped by with a potted plant and sat with me for an hour. But the second week came and went with no visits. Just a brief phone call where James seemed distracted, mentioning something about repairs at the house. By the third week, when I called my neighbor Ernest to check on things, I learned the truth. "Harold," Ernest said hesitantly, "there's a moving truck outside your house right now. Been there all day. And yesterday, I saw some men changing all the locks." Heart sank like a stone. "Moving truck? What are they moving?" There was a long pause. "Everything, Harold. Furniture, boxes, looks like they're emptying the place." I hung up and immediately called James, straight to voicemail. I called the house, my house. No answer. I called Melissa's cell. She answered, then hung up when she heard my voice. That night, I couldn't sleep. The thin mattress felt like concrete beneath my back. The fluorescent lights from the hallway seeped under my door, casting ghostly shadows across the floor. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a ghost myself. Transparent, unseen, forgotten. The next morning, I asked Sandra, the kind-hearted nurse with bright purple glasses, to help me call a taxi. She frowned. "Mr. Wilson, your file. Says you're not to leave the premises without family permission." "Family permission?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "I'm a grown man, not a child." She looked uncomfortable. "Your son signed the intake forms as your guardian. Says here you have cognitive issues." Cognitive issues? I'd worked as a structural engineer for 40 years. I still did the New York Times crossword every Sunday. In pen. "There's nothing wrong." "With my mind," I told her firmly. She glanced around, then leaned closer. "I believe you," she whispered, "but there's paperwork." That was when I realized what had happened. James hadn't just sent me away, he'd locked me away, signed me off as incompetent, a burden to be stored on a shelf and forgotten. I finally convinced Sandra to let me use her personal cell phone during her break. I called my old friend and attorney Theodore Winters. No answer. I called Ernest again. "Ernest," I said when he picked up, "I need you to go to my house. I need to know what's happening." 3 excruciating hours later, Ernest called back. "Harold," he said, his voice heavy, "I spoke to your son. He says you agreed to sell the house, that you signed the papers before going to Sunny Meadows." "That's a lie," I said, my voice shaking with rage and grief. "I never signed anything." "Well, someone did," Ernest replied. "There's a 'for sale' sign in the yard now, and your son and his wife are living there until it sells." I felt the room spinning around me. The family photos I'd carefully arranged on every surface. Caroline's antique vanity that I'd kept exactly as she left it. The workshop in the garage where I'd taught James to build his first birdhouse, all being sold off or thrown away, while I sat trapped in this glorified prison with beige walls. "Harold?" Ernest's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you still there?" "Yes," I said, though I felt miles away from myself. "Ernest, I need another favor." That evening, I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, clutching the manila envelope Ernest had smuggled in during visiting hours. Inside were copies of the documents James had filed, a power of attorney I'd supposedly signed, transfer of property, papers, even medical forms declaring me unfit to manage my own affairs. The signatures were close. James had learned to forge my handwriting over the years for school notes and permission slips, but they weren't mine. As I stared at those false signatures, something broke inside me. Not my heart. That had broken the moment I realized my son saw me as nothing but a burden. No. What broke was the chain of blind trust and unconditional love that had bound me to my son for 50 years. In its place grew something else, a cold, hard resolve. I had built my life from nothing. Worked 2 jobs to put myself through engineering, school, saved every penny to give James opportunities I never had, sacrificed vacations and new cars and retirement dreams so he could attend an Ivy League college, given him everything, including the inheritance his mother left behind. And this was how he repaid me. Not just stealing my house and possessions, but stealing my dignity, my freedom, my very identity. I carefully folded the papers and slid them back into the envelope. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I knew exactly what I needed to do. James thought. He had rid himself of a burden, but he had no idea what a real burden was. I was going to show him. The days at Sunny Meadows blurred together like watercolors left in the rain. Breakfast at 7:30, medication rounds at 8:15, though I needed no medication. Activities in the common room at Tinichu, lunch at noon. The same beige walls, the same disinfectant smell, the same sad eyes staring back at me from the small mirror above my sink. One morning, about 2 weeks after I discovered James's betrayal, I found myself sitting alone in the corner of the dining hall, pushing lukewarm oatmeal around my bowl. Someone pulled out the chair across from me. "Mind if I join you?" asked a deep voice with a slight southern drawl. I looked up to see a tall, thin man with silver hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a cardigan, despite the warm June weather, and carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who still ironed his own shirts. "Suit yourself," I said, gesturing to the empty chair. "Raymond Holbrook," he said, extending his hand across the table. "Former attorney, current prisoner of Sunny Meadows." I couldn't help but smile at his candor. "Harold Wilson, former structural engineer, current victim of filial betrayal." Raymond nodded knowingly as he unfolded his napkin. "Ah, the classic tale. Let me guess, they told you it was temporary, then changed the locks?" "And forged my signature on power of attorney documents." And started selling off everything I own, I added. Son or daughter? Son, James, and his wife, Melissa. Raymond sighed. It's always the ones we sacrifice the most for who turn around and treat us like yesterday's garbage. Over the next hour, Raymond told me his story. His daughter had moved him into Sunny Meadows after his wife died, promising to maintain his house until he felt better. 3 months later, she'd sold it and used the money to open a boutique in Charleston. By the time I figured out what was happening, the deed was done, he said, shaking his head. 40 years of law practice, and my own daughter outmaneuvered me. Didn't you fight it? I asked. A shadow crossed his face. I tried, but she'd covered her tracks well. Had a doctor friend declare me mildly cognitively impaired, just enough to make my protest seem like confusion. He leaned forward. But you still have fire in your eyes, Harold, and if they only recently started this scheme, you might still have a chance. For the first time since arriving at Sunny Meadows, I felt something like hope stir within me. That afternoon, Raymond and I sat in the small courtyard, away from prying ears. He asked pointed questions about my finances, property, and the timeline of events. As I answered, painful memories surfaced like bruises. After Caroline, my wife, died, I threw myself into fixing up the house, I explained. I didn't want to sit around feeling sorry for myself. I renovated the kitchen, built a new deck, even added a sunroom she'd always wanted, increasing the property value, Raymond noted. I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about keeping her dreams alive somehow. I paused, remembering. James never understood. He kept suggesting I sell the place, move into something more manageable. But that house, I built parts of it with my own hands. Every corner holds a memory. And now he's living in it with Melissa, waiting for it to sell. According to my neighbor, they've listed it for nearly twice what I paid. Raymond's eyes narrowed. Do you have any assets James doesn't know about? Accounts Caroline might have set up? Investments? Safety deposit boxes? I started to shake my head, then stopped. Wait, there is something. When Caroline was diagnosed with cancer 6 years ago, she'd insisted on getting our affairs in order. Just in case, she'd said, though we both pretended she would beat it, she'd set up a small investment account in my name only, funded with money she'd inherited from her aunt. It wasn't much, maybe $50,000, but she'd been adamant that James not know about it. Our safety net, she'd called it, because James has always been a bit too eager to spend money that isn't his. I'd forgotten about the account until now. After Caroline died, I couldn't bear to touch it. It was the last thing she'd done to protect me. If James doesn't know about it, he can't have touched it, Raymond said, excitement creeping into his voice. And if it's still active, it gives us leverage. Leverage for what? To fight back. Raymond's eyes gleamed. Harold, I may be stuck here, but you don't have to be. Not if we're smart about this. That night, after lights out, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about James. My only child. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, to throw a baseball, to change the oil in his first car. The young man I'd stayed up with all night, helping him prepare for his college interviews. The son I'd given everything to, including the inheritance Caroline had left for both of us. When had he changed? When had he started seeing me as nothing but a burden? A problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. Perhaps the signs had been there all along. The impatience when I couldn't immediately understand his new smartphone. The exasperation when I insisted on doing home repairs myself instead of hiring someone. The way he and Melissa exchanged glances when I mentioned future plans, as if the idea of me having a future was absurd. I thought of the house. My house. The dining room table where we'd eaten Sunday dinners for decades, the front porch swing where Caroline and I had watched countless sunsets, the yard where James had taken his first steps. All being sold to strangers, while I rotted away in this place, forgotten. No, not forgotten. I would not allow myself to be erased so easily. The next morning, I asked Sandra, the purple glasses nurse, if I could make a private phone call. "It's important," I told her. "I need to speak with my bank." She hesitated, glancing around. "Mr. Wilson, your care plan says all financial matters should go through your son." "Sandra," I said, holding her gaze, "we both know I'm perfectly competent. We both know I shouldn't be here. Please." Something in my voice must have moved her. She nodded slightly. 10 minutes, in the staff break room. I'll watch the door." It took some doing, security questions, verification of my identity, but eventually I confirmed that Caroline's investment account was still active. In fact, it had grown to nearly $75,000. The bank representative seemed concerned about my situation, especially when I explained I was calling from a nursing home. "Mr. Wilson, would you like us to place a hold on all your accounts?" she asked. "If you're concerned about unauthorized access, we can flag them immediately." "Yes," I said, feeling a surge of satisfaction. "Flag everything, and I'd like to arrange a withdrawal from the investment account." When I hung up, I had a plan forming, the first fragile scaffolding of a way out. I'd need help, documents, legal, advice. But for the first time since the door had closed behind me at Sunny Meadows, I felt like I might find my way back to freedom. And when I did, James would learn what it truly meant to carry a burden. "You need allies on the outside," Raymond said, his voice low as we sat in the farthest corner of the Sunny Meadows courtyard. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the browning grass, and most residents were still at breakfast, giving us a rare moment of privacy. "I have Ernest," I replied. "My neighbor." Raymond shook his head. "Neighbors are good, but you need someone with influence, someone who can vouch for your mental competence and has the social standing to be believed." I thought about this. Since retiring 5 years ago, my social circle had shrunk considerably. Caroline had been the one who maintained our friendships, organized dinner parties, kept in touch with colleagues. After she passed, I'd retreated into my workshop, finding more comfort in woodworking than in awkward conversations where people didn't know whether to mention Caroline or pretend she'd never existed. Then I remembered Martin Calloway. "My former boss," I said slowly. "Martin and I worked together for 30 years. He's still on the board at the engineering firm. He came to Caroline's funeral, sends a Christmas card every year." "Perfect," Raymond nodded. "Anyone else?" "Dr. Patel, my physician for the past 15 years. The pastor at First Presbyterian, where Caroline and I had been members since James was a boy. And then there was Judge Williams, Caroline's cousin, who had always treated me like family even after she passed." "That's a solid foundation," Raymond said when I'd finished listing potential allies. "Now we need to reach them without tipping off James." That proved more challenging than I expected. The staff monitored phone calls. Mail was sometimes misplaced if they thought residents were confused, and visitors had to sign in, with family members notified of who came to see their elderly relatives. Fortunately, I had Sandra. "I need to get some messages out," I told her during medication rounds that evening. "To old friends. It's important, Sandra." She pushed her purple glasses up her nose, looking nervously down the hall. "Mr. Wilson, I could lose my job." "I know. And I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical." I hesitated, then added, "My son put me here against my will, Sandra. He's selling my house, everything I own. I need help." Her eyes softened. "My grandmother went through something similar with my uncle. She died thinking no one believed her." She straightened her shoulders. "What do you need?" Over the next 3 days, Sandra helped me make calls from the staff phone, sent emails from her personal account, and even hand-delivered a letter to Ernest, who lived just a few blocks from the facility. The responses came faster than I dared. Hope. Martin Calloway arrived on Thursday afternoon, listed on the visitor log as my former colleague, and therefore not triggering any alerts to James. His shock at seeing me in Sunny Meadows was evident in the deep furrows of his brow. "Harold, what the hell? he asked, settling his imposing frame into the visitor's lounge chair. At 70, Martin still looked like he could supervise a construction site, with broad shoulders and hands calloused from years of field work before he'd moved into management. Your message said it was urgent, but I had no idea. I explained everything: the fall, James and Melissa's insistence on the temporary stay, the discovered betrayal. When I mentioned the forged power of attorney, Martin's face darkened like a thundercloud. That's not just unethical, it's criminal, he growled. James always struck me as entitled, but this crosses every line. I need to prove I'm competent, I told him, and I need legal help that James can't block or be notified about. Martin leaned forward. Consider it done. My daughter-in-law is a senior partner at Grant & Patterson, specializes in elder law, and I'll personally vouch for your mental acuity. Hell, you were still correcting my structural calculations 6 months before you retired. Relief washed over me like a cool wave. Thank you, Martin. He clasped my shoulder. Don't thank me yet. Save that for when you're back in your own home and James is facing consequences. The next day, Dr. Patel arrived, ostensibly to check on a former patient, but actually to perform a cognitive assessment that would counter whatever evaluation James had used to support his claims of my incompetence. Your mind is sharper than half my 40-year-old patient's, Dr. Patel said afterward, his precise handwriting filling out an official report. I'm documenting that you show no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever. Through Ernest, I received word that Judge Williams was extremely disturbed by what had happened and was making calls of her own. And Pastor Roberts had visited James directly, expressing concern about my sudden absence from church and community, putting my son on notice that people were asking questions. But the most unexpected ally came in the form of my grandson, Tyler. He arrived on Sunday afternoon, slipping past the front desk by joining a large group of visiting family members. He found me in the small library, where Raymond and I were reviewing the legal strategy his daughter-in-law, Marissa Grant, had outlined. "Grandpa," Tyler said, his lanky teenage frame suddenly appearing in the doorway. At 16, he had Caroline's eyes and my stubborn chin. "Tyler," I stood up, surprised and moved. "How did you find me?" "Ernest told me where you were." His voice cracked with emotion. "Dad said you were in a fancy retirement community because you kept having accidents at home. He said it was your idea." The hurt in his eyes made my heart ache. "It wasn't my idea, son." Tyler nodded. "I figured that out when I saw them moving your stuff. Dad got mad when I asked why they were selling your tools." He pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small notebook bound in worn leather. "I saved this. It's your project journal, right? With all your woodworking designs?" I took the notebook, my hands trembling slightly. It contained decades of sketches, measurements, notes, projects I'd built for Caroline, for our home, for James when he was young. I had planned to pass it on to Tyler someday. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice rough with emotion. "Is it true?" Tyler asked. "About Dad taking your house?" "Yes," I said simply. I wouldn't lie to the boy, but I also wouldn't turn him against his father. "There's been a misunderstanding about what's best for me." Tyler's jaw set in a familiar stubborn line. "It's wrong. Mom and Dad have been fighting about it. She didn't know at first, but now." He trailed off. An interesting piece of information. Melissa hadn't initially been aware of the full extent of James's deception. Perhaps there were cracks in their united front. "Tyler," I said carefully, "I'm working to resolve this, but I need your help." "Anything, Grandpa." "I need information. What's happening at the house? Who's been there? Has your father mentioned any financial problems?" Tyler's eyes lit with understanding. Like reconnaissance. Despite everything, I smiled. The boy had always loved spy novels, exactly like that. But you have to be careful. "Don't let your father know you're helping me." Tyler nodded solemnly. "I can do it. Dad's been weird lately, staying up late, looking at bank statements, and there are these guys in suits who keep coming to the house. He lowered his voice. I think he owes someone money. I heard Mom yelling about credit card debt. So that was it. Not just opportunism, but desperation. James needed money, and selling my house, my life, was his solution. Raymond, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. Young man, how would you feel about delivering some documents for your grandfather? Nothing illegal, just papers that need to reach certain people without your father's knowledge. Tyler straightened, looking older than his 16 years. I'll do it. For Grandpa. After Tyler left, carrying copies of Dr. Patel's assessment and Martin's affidavit to deliver to Marissa Grant, Raymond and I sat in contemplative silence. You have a good grandson, Raymond finally said. Yes, I agreed, my throat tight with emotion. He reminds me of who James used to be. And that was the deepest cut of all, remembering the bright-eyed boy who had once looked at me with the same loyalty and love that Tyler now showed. The son who had somehow transformed into a man capable of discarding his own father for financial gain. But for the first time since arriving at Sunny Meadows, I felt the balance of power shifting. I had allies, information, and the beginnings of a legal counteroffensive. I had something James hadn't counted on. I had fight left in me. As Raymond and I refined our strategy into the evening, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't just about reclaiming my house or my possessions. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my agency, my life. And when I succeeded, not if, but when, James would discover the true meaning of burden. 3 weeks into my stay at Sunny Meadows, I began my transformation. Not the kind the glossy brochure promised, transforming your golden years into a worry-free experience, but a metamorphosis of purpose and resolve. Each morning, I woke before the other residents, completing a series of exercises Raymond had taught me to maintain my strength. Push-ups against the wall, squats using the chair for balance, stretching routines to keep my joints limber. They expect physical decline, Raymond had explained. Don't give it to them. I took my meals in the dining hall, engaging other residents, in conversation, learning their stories, building a small community of allies. Many had been abandoned like us, though few realized the extent of their children's betrayal. Some, with minds clouded by dementia or medication, believed they were just visiting this beige purgatory. Others knew exactly where they were, but had resigned themselves to it. I refused to resign. When Phil Jenkins, a former contractor with Parkinson's, mentioned that the recreation room bookshelf was unstable, I volunteered to fix it. The staff initially refused, liability concerns, but relented when several residents insisted. Using borrowed tools and scrap wood from the maintenance shed, I reinforced the wobbly structure, adding proper bracing and leveling the shelves. Looks better than new, Phil said, running a trembling hand along the sturdy frame. Word spread. Soon I was repairing loose chair legs, fixing stuck drawers, and even rebuilding the birdhouses in the courtyard that had fallen into disrepair. Each project reinforced what I needed everyone to see. I was capable, competent, and far from the confused old man James had portrayed. Sandra, my purple glasses ally, brought me updates from the outside world. Marissa Grant had filed motions to invalidate the fraudulent power of attorney. Dr. Patel's assessment had been entered into court. Records. Judge Williams had quietly expedited the case review. Your son's attorney filed for a continuance, Sandra told me one afternoon, slipping a folded note from Marissa into my hand during medication rounds. They're stalling. Of course they were. Every day I remained at Sunny Meadows was another day. James could liquidate my possessions. Another day he could show potential buyers through my home. Another day he could entrench himself in the life he'd stolen from me. But I had an unexpected advantage. Tyler. My grandson proved to be an exceptional spy. During his weekly community service visits to Sunny Meadows, a cover story he'd created with the help of his school counselor, he brought detailed reports. "Dad's cleared out your workshop," he told me one day, his voice low as we sat in the courtyard. "Sold most of the tools to a guy from his office, but I saved these." He pulled my precision calipers from his backpack, along with a small hand-carved box containing my favorite chisels, tools that had been my father's before me. "How did you manage that?" I asked, running my fingers over the familiar wooden handles. Told him I wanted to learn woodworking. Tyler grinned. He was so excited about me finally showing interest in something practical that he let me pick some tools to keep. I felt a surge of pride, followed by a pang of sadness. James had once shown the same enthusiasm for woodworking, spending hours with me in the workshop as a boy. When had he lost that connection? When had money become more important than memories? "There's something else," Tyler said, his expression turning serious. "I found papers in Dad's office, loan applications, rejection letters from banks, and a letter from someone named Victor Crane about collection measures if Dad doesn't make payment arrangements." A loan shark. The pieces were falling into place. James wasn't just opportunistically cashing in on my house, he was desperate, drowning in debt he couldn't escape. I shared this information with Raymond and Marissa during our next strategy session, conducted via Sandra's smuggled cell phone. "This changes things," Marissa said, her voice crisp and professional through the speaker. "If he's involved with predatory lenders, we can leverage that. No judge wants to see an elderly parent's assets liquidated to pay off a loan shark." "We need proof," Raymond counseled. "Documented evidence of these debts and their connection to your property." Tyler provided that proof the following week. Photographs of documents taken while James and Melissa were at a dinner party. Loan applications with my house listed as collateral. Emails from Victor Crane with thinly veiled threats. Bank statements showing massive credit card debt. "This is excellent work," Raymond told Tyler, reviewing the photos on Sandra's phone. "You'd make a fine attorney someday," Tyler beamed. "Grandpa always says details matter." "Your grandfather is right," Raymond nodded. "Details are how we'll win this case." While my legal team built our case from the outside, I continued strengthening my position within Sunny Meadows. I volunteered to help with activity planning, suggesting modifications to make events more engaging for residents with different abilities. I started a small reading group, selecting books that stimulated thoughtful discussion. When the facility administrator, Mrs. Winters, noticed these initiatives, she invited me to join the Resident Advisory Committee, a largely ceremonial group that supposedly gave input on facility operations. "You've shown remarkable leadership skills, Mr. Wilson," she said, her corporate smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We value resident engagement." What she meant was that my activities made the facility look good when family members visited. I accepted the position anyway. It gave me access to the administrative offices, where I could occasionally glimpse resident files and facility communications. During one committee meeting, I casually suggested creating a skills inventory of residents to better tailor activities. "Many people here have valuable knowledge and experience," I explained. "Phil was a contractor. Dorothy was a librarian. Raymond was an attorney. We could develop programs where residents teach each other." Mrs. Winters loved the idea. It cost nothing and sounded progressive. I volunteered to compile the inventory, which gave me legitimate reason to interview residents, including those whose minds were still sharp but whose bodies had betrayed them. Within 2 weeks, I had identified 7 more residents who, like me, had been placed in Sunny Meadows against their wishes or through manipulation. With Raymond's guidance, I helped them connect with family members who hadn't been part of the deception, or with legal resources when family wasn't an option. Sunny Meadows began to change. Not dramatically, the walls remained beige, the food institutional, the sense of abandonment palpable. But small pockets of resistance formed. Residents who had been passive started asking questions. Staff members like Sandra, who had always been kind but cautious, began actively advocating for those in their care. "You're building a community," Raymond observed one evening as we played chess in the common room. "Not just fighting for yourself anymore." He was right. What had begun as a personal battle against James's betrayal had evolved into something larger. I wasn't just an engineer by training, I was a builder by nature. And here, in this place, designed to warehouse the elderly until death, I was building something unexpected. Hope. 6 weeks after my arrival at Sunny Meadows, James finally visited. He came alone, without Melissa, his BMW gleaming in the visitor's parking lot like an accusation. I was in the middle of helping install a new garden box in the courtyard, a project I'd designed to be accessible for residents in wheelchairs, when Sandra found me. "Your son is here," she said, her expression conveying what words couldn't. "Be careful." I wiped my hands on my jeans, nodded thanks to Phil and the others helping with the garden, and walked unhurriedly to the visitor's lounge. James stood by the window, scrolling through his phone. At 48, he looked like a more polished version of me. Same height, same build, but with designer clothes and a carefully maintained haircut that probably cost more than a week's worth of meals at Sunny Meadows. He looked up when I entered, his expression an artful blend of concern and affection, the same look he'd perfected when asking for money for his first car, his college apartment, his wedding. "Dad," he said warmly, stepping forward for an embrace I didn't return. "You look, well, how are you settling in?" I observed him with detachment, noting the slight twitch in his left eye, a tell he'd had since childhood when he was lying or nervous. "I'm not settling in, James," I replied calmly, taking a seat and gesturing. For him to do the same. "I'm temporarily residing here while we resolve the situation with my house." The carefully constructed expression faltered. "Your house?" "Dad, we talked about this. You agreed selling was the best option. You signed the papers." "I signed nothing," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "And we both know it." James's face flushed. He glanced around the lounge, but we were alone. "Look, you had a bad fall. You're getting confused sometimes. The doctor said—" "Which doctor?" "Not Dr. Patel, who's been my physician for 15 years. Not Dr. Levine, the neurologist who gave me a clean bill of health after Caroline died." I leaned forward slightly. "Which doctor, James?" He shifted uncomfortably. "A specialist in geriatric care." "Dr. Robert Venturi," I supplied. "Melissa's cousin, who saw me exactly once during a family dinner 3 months ago." James's eyes widened slightly. "How did you—" "I have resources you didn't account for," I interrupted. "Friends, colleagues, people who know exactly who I am and what I'm capable of." For a moment, I glimpsed something like fear in my son's eyes, quickly masked behind indignation. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "You're acting paranoid. I'm trying to help you. The house is too much for you to manage alone. The proceeds from the sale will ensure you have excellent care for the rest of your life." "Is that what you tell yourself?" I asked quietly. "That. You're doing this for me, not for your creditors, not for Victor Crane." James went pale. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know everything, James. The loans, the rejected refinancing applications, the threats." I held his gaze steadily. "What I don't know is when you decided I was worth less to you than money." He stood abruptly, fists clenched at his sides. "This conversation is over. You're clearly not in your right mind." I remained seated, calm. "Actually, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. And I want you to know something, son." I paused, making sure he was listening. "I forgive you for what you've done, but I will not allow it to continue." James stared at me, confusion warring with anger on his face. He hadn't expected this version of me, not angry or broken, but resolute and in control. "We'll see about that," he finally muttered, turning to leave. At the doorway, he paused. "I'm still your legal guardian, Dad. Remember that." After he left, Raymond found me still sitting in the lounge, staring at the empty doorway. "How did it go?" he asked, settling his lanky frame into the chair James had vacated. "He's scared," I said, "and desperate. A dangerous combination." Raymond nodded grimly. "Then we need to move faster. Marissa's scheduled the competency hearing for next week." I took a deep breath, mentally reviewing our strategy. "I'll be ready." As I walked back to the courtyard to finish the garden project, I felt oddly light. Seeing James, confronting him directly, had crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about reclaiming my property or exposing his deception. It was about helping him face the consequences of his choices. And sometimes, the heaviest burden a parent can give a child is the truth. The competency hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning at the county courthouse, a grand limestone building I'd passed countless times but rarely entered. Marissa arranged for Sandra to help me prepare. A fresh haircut, my good suit retrieved by Tyler from the back of my closet at home, and a careful review of what to expect during the proceedings. "Just be yourself," Marissa advised during our final preparation call. "Answer questions directly. Don't get emotional or hostile, no matter what James's attorney says. The judge needs to see you as collected and rational." The morning of the hearing, Raymond clasped my shoulder before I left. "Remember, Harold, truth doesn't need embellishment. It stands on its own foundation. Leave it to an attorney to find." The perfect metaphor for an engineer. Martin Calloway arrived at precisely 8:30 a.m. to drive me to the courthouse. Sunny Meadows administration had initially tried to prevent my departure, citing safety concerns, but quickly changed their tune when Marissa arrived with a court order and a sheriff's deputy. "You've caused quite a stir around here," Martin commented as we drove away from the facility, his vintage Cadillac purring along the tree-lined streets. Mrs. Winters looked like she'd swallowed a lemon when Marissa served those papers. I gazed, out the window, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by. "Change is uncomfortable for institutions built on complacency," Martin chuckled. "Still the philosopher-engineer. Caroline always said you built bridges with both steel and words." The mention of my late wife sent a pang through my chest. She should be here for this. She would have prevented it entirely. James had never been able to deceive his mother the way he'd deceived me. The courthouse steps were more challenging than I remembered. Martin patiently matched my pace as we climbed, neither of us mentioning my slightly labored breathing. Inside, the marble halls echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. I spotted Marissa immediately, a tall, striking woman in a charcoal suit, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a precise bun. "Mr. Wilson," she said, extending her hand. "I'm glad to finally meet you in person. Likewise, Miss Grant. Your father-in-law speaks highly of you." She smiled briefly. "Raymond is the reason I went into elder law. He's been an exceptional mentor." Her expression turned serious. "James has arrived with his attorney, Lawrence Dunham. Dunham specializes in estate planning and has a reputation for aggressive tactics. Don't let him rattle you." We proceeded to courtroom 3, where Judge Eleanor Montgomery presided. At 70, she was a formidable presence on the bench, known for her no-nonsense approach and razor-sharp legal mind. I felt a flutter of nerves as we entered the wood-paneled room. James sat at the respondent's table with a sleek, silver-haired man I assumed was Dunham. My son wouldn't meet my eyes, staring fixedly at his legal pad as if it contained the secrets of the universe. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Montgomery entered. The proceedings began with opening statements. Marissa outlined the case. Succinctly, my son had falsified documents, declared me incompetent without proper medical evaluation, and was attempting to liquidate my assets against my will. Dunham countered that James was acting out of concern for my safety after a series of troubling incidents demonstrated I could no longer care for myself. Then came the evidence. Dr. Patel testified about my excellent cognitive function. Martin spoke about my continued engagement with engineering projects even after retirement. Judge Williams, though not testifying officially due to her position, had submitted a written statement about my regular participation in community events. Dunham presented incident reports of my fall, along with testimony from Dr. Venturi about his observations of my mental state. He also brought up occasions when I'd forgotten names or appointments, normal aging moments that he attempted to paint as cognitive decline. Finally, it was my turn to testify. He approached the witness stand, took the oath, and sat down, adjusting my tie. The same blue silk tie Caroline had given me for our 30th anniversary. I felt her presence strongly in that moment, a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Mr. Wilson," Marissa began, "could you please tell the court about the circumstances that led to your placement at Sunny Meadows Care Facility?" For the next 20 minutes I recounted everything: the minor fall, James and Melissa's insistence on temporary care, the discovery that my house was being sold without my knowledge or consent. I outlined the evidence Tyler had gathered about James's financial troubles and his connections to predatory lenders. Throughout my testimony, I maintained eye contact with Judge Montgomery, speaking clearly and calmly. I noticed her sharp gaze assessing me, looking for signs of confusion or distress and finding none. When Dunham cross-examined me, he tried every trick to trip me up: rapid-fire questions, confusing dates, mischaracterizing previous statements. I took my time answering, correcting his inaccuracies politely but firmly. "Isn't it true," Dunham asked with performative concern, "that you've had difficulty managing your finances since your wife's passing?" "No, it is not true," I replied. "I've maintained my household budget, paid all bills on time, and even increased my investment portfolio by 12% over the past 3 years. Yet you failed to notice your son adding his name to your accounts?" "He didn't add his name. He forged my signature on new account documents. There's a substantial difference." "Counselor!" A flicker of annoyance crossed Dunham's face. He wasn't used to elderly clients who could hold their own. "Your Honor," he pivoted, "I'd like to submit these photographs as evidence." He presented pictures of my workshop with tools scattered about, projects in various stages of completion. This is the environment Mr. Wilson was living in, clearly hazardous for a man of his age. I couldn't help but smile. "That's not hazardous, Mr. Dunham. That's creativity in progress. Every tool there has its place and purpose. I could tell you where each one belongs and what project it was being used for." Judge Montgomery raised an eyebrow. "Would you care to demonstrate, Mr. Wilson?" For the next few minutes I described each project visible in the photos, the specific tools required, and the techniques being employed. I pointed out the safety measures evident in the setup: the fire extinguisher, mounted on the wall, the clearly marked spaces for sharp tools, the anti-fatigue mats to prevent slips. "In 47 years of woodworking," I concluded, "I've never had a serious injury. Safety was the first lesson I taught my son when he was learning the craft." I glanced at James, who was staring at his hands, his knuckles white. After a brief recess, Judge Montgomery delivered her ruling. Her voice carried through the courtroom, crisp and authoritative. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, this court finds no basis for the claim that Harold Wilson is incompetent or unable to manage his affairs. The power of attorney granted to James Wilson is hereby revoked, and all financial and medical decisions are returned to Mr. Wilson's sole discretion." Relief washed over me like a warm tide. Marissa squeezed my arm gently. But Judge Montgomery wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she continued, her gaze hard as it settled on James, "this court finds compelling evidence of fraud and financial exploitation. All property transfers initiated under the fraudulent power of attorney are nullified. Mr. James Wilson is ordered to provide a full accounting of all assets removed from his father's possession within 7 days. She paused, tapping her glasses against her palm. I am also referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Elder abuse and financial exploitation are serious offenses in this state. James visibly paled. Dunham leaned over, whispering urgently in his ear. Mr. Wilson. Judge Montgomery addressed me directly, her expression softening slightly. This court apologizes for the ordeal you've endured. You are, of course, free to return to your home immediately. Thank you, Your Honor, I replied, standing as straight as my 75-year-old spine would allow. Outside the courtroom, a small group had gathered. Ernest, Tyler, Sandra, who had taken the day off to attend. Even Phil from Sunny Meadows, supported by his daughter. Their presence moved me deeply. Congratulations, Grandpa, Tyler said, giving me a careful hug. Can I help you move back home today? Before I could answer, James approached, his attorney hovering anxiously behind him. My son's face was a mask of conflicting emotions. Anger, fear, and something that might have been shame. Dad, he began, his voice tight. We need to talk privately. No, we don't, I replied calmly. Everything that needs to be said can be said here. James glanced uncomfortably at the small crowd. This is a family matter. Yes, it is, I agreed. And these people are the family who stood by me when you decided I was disposable. His jaw clenched. You don't understand. I was in an impossible situation. Melissa's spending, the market crash, Victor's loans. I was drowning. The house was the only asset valuable enough to clear everything. You could have asked for help, I said quietly. Instead, you chose deception. Would you have sold the house if I'd asked? Been willing to live in a facility? I looked him directly in the eyes. My eyes, Caroline's stubborn chin. No, but I would have helped you find another solution. That's what family does, James. They help each other through difficulties. They don't discard each other when things get hard. Something in him seemed to crumble. For a moment, I saw the boy who had come to me with broken toys and skinned knees, seeking comfort and solutions. But that boy was long gone, replaced by a man who had made choices that couldn't be easily undone. What happens now? He asked, his voice uncharacteristically small. Now, I said, you face the consequences of your actions, starting with moving out of my house. But where will we go? Melissa left last week. The market's terrible for rentals. I can't find anything on short notice. And there it was, the real crisis. Not concern for me, but concern for himself. The worry not of a son who'd wronged his father, but of a man who was losing his shelter. I thought of Caroline then, of what she would say in this moment. She'd always been the compass of our family, pointing us toward compassion even when it was difficult. You have 48 hours to remove your personal belongings, I told him. Then I expect the keys returned. As for your housing situation, I paused, measuring my next words carefully. That's a burden you'll have to carry yourself. James stared at me, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. He opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it again. I'll have everything out by tomorrow night, he finally said, turning to leave. James, I called after him. He stopped, but didn't turn around. I meant what I said at Sunny Meadows. I do forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean there aren't consequences. His shoulders tensed, then slumped. Without another word, he walked away, Dunham trailing behind him with whispered legal advice that no longer mattered. As we watched him disappear down the courthouse hallway, Martin clapped me gently on the shoulder. That couldn't have been easy. No, I agreed, feeling a complex mixture of sadness and vindication. But it was necessary. Tyler slipped his hand into mine, a gesture he hadn't made since he was a small boy. I'm proud of you, Grandpa. Looking. Around at the circle of supporters who had helped me reclaim my life, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Caroline's death. A sense of belonging, of being valued not for what I could provide, but simply for who I was. "Let's go home," I said, the word tasting sweet after so long. As we descended the courthouse steps together, I knew this victory wasn't just about regaining my house, it was about rebuilding my life on a foundation of truth, and showing James that the heaviest burden isn't age or illness or even financial hardship. It's the weight of facing who you've truly become. Coming home after nearly 2 months at Sunny Meadows felt like walking into a dream. Familiar, yet somehow altered. The structure remained the same, the sturdy colonial I'd maintained for decades, but the soul of the place had been disturbed. "They didn't take care of things," Ernest commented as he helped me through the front door, gesturing to the dusty baseboards and neglected plants. "Lived here like they were in a hotel." I moved through the rooms slowly, cataloging changes. Caroline's antique reading lamp, gone. The handcrafted coffee table I'd made for our 25th anniversary, replaced by some mass-produced glass monstrosity. Family photographs removed from walls, leaving ghostly rectangles on the faded paint. In the kitchen, Melissa had installed a complicated espresso machine but left dishes piled in the sink. The refrigerator contained takeout containers and energy drinks, but no real food. The pantry held expensive gourmet snacks alongside cobwebs, testament to a life of consumption without care. Upstairs, the master bedroom had been utterly transformed. Our sturdy oak furniture had been replaced by some chrome and velvet ensemble that looked like it belonged in a nightclub rather than a bedroom. Caroline's vanity was gone, along with the quilt her grandmother had made that we'd kept at the foot of our bed for 30 years. I stood in the center of the unfamiliar room, feeling strangely calm. This wasn't my space anymore. Not yet. It would need to be reclaimed, just as I had reclaimed my freedom. "We can start fresh, Grandpa," Tyler said, appearing in the doorway with a box of my clothes he'd rescued from the garage. "Make it yours again." His simple confidence was the lifeline I needed. "Yes," I agreed. "We'll start fresh." Over the next 48 hours, a small army of supporters helped me reclaim my home. Martin and his son brought tools and materials to repair items James had neglected. Sandra and 2 other nurses from Sunny Meadows helped clean and organize. Ernest and his wife brought home-cooked meals and grocery staples. Phil arrived with his daughter, who turned out to be an interior designer. "Dad says you fix things for everyone at Sunny Meadows," she explained. "Let me return the favor." Tyler worked tirelessly, moving between rooms with the energy only a teenager possesses, helping wherever needed. He'd taken a particular interest in restoring the workshop in the garage, carefully returning my rescued tools to their proper places. James arrived late on the second day, as promised, to collect his and Melissa's remaining belongings. He brought a moving truck and 2 friends to help, avoiding eye contact with me as they worked. I stayed in the kitchen, reviewing paperwork with Marissa, giving him space to complete this final task. As the last box was loaded, he hesitated at the front door, keys dangling from his fingers. "I've turned off the utilities in my name," he said, his voice flat. "Accounts are switched back to yours." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the keys he held out. He shifted uncomfortably. "I left something for you in the garage." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further. This awkward exchange was nothing like the reconciliation scenes in movies. No tearful embraces, no profound apologies. Just a broken relationship and the quiet acknowledgement of its fractures. After James left, I went to the garage. There, placed carefully on my workbench, was Caroline's vanity, the one piece of furniture I had feared truly lost. Beside it sat a small wooden box I recognized immediately, the first project James and I had completed together, a simple jewelry box for Caroline's birthday when he was 10. Inside the box was a folded note in James's handwriting. "I'm sorry. I know it's not enough." He was right, it wasn't enough, but it was something, a small recognition of the person he had once been, before debt and desperation had corrupted his character. That night, when the house was finally quiet and most of my helpers had gone home, Raymond called. He'd been following our progress through regular updates from Sandra. "How does freedom feel?" he asked. I looked around my kitchen, clean now, organized, some of my old implements returned to their proper places, others still missing, but the spaces ready for new ones. "Like responsibility," I answered honestly. "Like I've been given back not just my home, but my purpose." "Good," Raymond said, "because I have a proposition for you." The proposition was both simple and profound. During my time at Sunny Meadows, I had helped 7 residents discover they were there under questionable circumstances. 3 had already begun legal proceedings with Marissa's firm. The others needed guidance, support, and temporary housing if they managed to free themselves. From institutional care, we need a halfway house, Raymond explained. Somewhere people can stay while they rebuild their lives and navigate the legal system. Somewhere they can relearn independence in a supportive environment. I thought of my empty bedrooms, the spacious first floor, the accessibility improvements I'd already made when Caroline was sick. "You want me to open my home," I said, understanding dawning. "I want you to consider it," Raymond corrected. "It wouldn't be simple. There would be regulations, insurance considerations, possibly even resistance from neighbors. But it would help people like us," I finished his thought. "People whose families decided they were burdens to be warehoused." Exactly. I promised to think about it. And I did, for exactly one night. By morning, my decision was made. 3 months later, the Wilson Transition House welcomed its first resident, Dorothy Lindstrom, an 83-year-old former librarian whose niece had placed her in Sunny Meadows after convincing her to sign over her condo. With Marissa's legal help, Dorothy had regained control of her affairs, but her condo had already been sold. She needed a place to stay while finding new housing and deciding on her next steps. "It's just temporary," she said nervously as Tyler helped bring in her suitcases. "Stay as long as you need," I assured her, showing her to the downstairs guest suite we'd renovated specifically for our new purpose. "This is a place for new beginnings, not endings." By the 6-month mark, we had 3 residents and a waiting list. Raymond had moved in as well, taking the role of legal advisor and house manager. His connections in the legal community brought us resources and referrals. My engineering background proved useful for making accommodations for various physical limitations. We received our official nonprofit status on the 1-year anniversary of my temporary admission to Sunny Meadows. The modest foundation was funded primarily by my own savings, supplemented by donations from supportive community members and families grateful to have their elderly relatives restored to dignified living. James never officially reconciled with me, but our relationship thawed slightly over time. He would call occasionally, brief conversations that carefully avoided the past. He sent a check when we launched the foundation, not a large amount, but symbolic, a recognition of the value of what we were building. Tyler became the bridge between us, spending weekends at my house helping with projects and visiting his father during the week. He never spoke much about James's situation, but I gathered that my son was living in a small apartment, working diligently to repair his finances and, perhaps, his character. On a warm Saturday afternoon, almost 18 months after the courthouse confrontation, I sat on my front porch watching Tyler teach Raymond's great-niece how to sand wood properly. They were building birdhouses, simple projects that would eventually stock our annual fundraiser. Dorothy approached, carefully balancing a tray with lemonade glasses. Her arthritis made carrying things challenging, but she insisted on contributing to household tasks. "We have visitors," she said, nodding toward a car pulling into the driveway. I recognized the vehicle immediately, James's BMW, slightly less polished than it had once been. He stepped out, looking thinner and somehow older, though it had been less than 2 years since our estrangement. "Dad," he said, approaching the porch hesitantly, "I hope it's okay that I stopped by." Of course, I replied, gesturing to an empty chair. Dorothy just brought lemonade. James settled awkwardly, accepting the glass Dorothy offered with a mumbled thank you. We sat in silence for a moment, watching Tyler demonstrate proper technique with the sanding block. The foundation seems to be doing well, James finally said. Tyler talks about it all the time. We're helping people, I nodded. Not as many as we'd like, but it's a start. Another pause, weighted with unspoken words. I've been seeing someone, James said abruptly. A therapist, for almost a year now. I turned to look at him directly, noting the unfamiliar humility in his expression. She's helping me understand why I did what I did. Not excuse it. Understand. He stared into his lemonade. I've spent my whole life running from feeling like a burden. Mom got sick, you worked 2 jobs, we never had what other families had. We had enough, I said quietly. I know that now. But then, I just felt like one more responsibility weighing you down. He shook his head. So, I built my life around never being dependent, never needing help. And when I finally failed, when the debts piled up and I couldn't fix it alone, I panicked. It wasn't a complete explanation or even a proper apology, but it was honest. Perhaps the most honest conversation we'd had in decades. Thank you for telling me, I said simply. James nodded, seemingly relieved that I hadn't rejected his partial truth. I want to do better. Be better. For Tyler. For myself. He hesitated. And for you, if you'll let me. I thought of the burden I'd promised to give him that day at Sunny Meadows, the weight of consequences of facing his actions. He was carrying it now, not perfectly but willingly. That was more than I had dared hope for. We're having a volunteer day next Saturday, I said. Building ramps for the back entrance. Could use someone who remembers how to measure twice and cut once. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him in years. I think I still remember. As James left that evening, promising to return the following weekend, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with victory or vindication. The circle had not closed. Our relationship would never return to what it had been, but perhaps it had evolved into something more honest. That night, sitting in my workshop and running my fingers over the smooth wood of a half-finished project, I thought of burdens. Those we carry, those we shed, and those we choose to bear because they shape us into better versions of ourselves. James had seen me as a burden and tried to discard me. In return, I had given him the burden of truth, uncomfortable, heavy, but ultimately transformative. And from that weight had emerged something unexpected. Not just my freedom or my reclaimed home, but a new purpose. The Wilson Transition House stood as living proof that being discarded wasn't the end of the story. That what others saw as burdens could become foundations. Strong, necessary, and enduring. Caroline would have approved. This was her legacy too. A home that welcomed those who needed shelter, a place where dignity wasn't determined by age or ability. As I carefully put away my tools for the night, I smiled at the thought that had sustained me through the darkest days at Sunny Meadows. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give those who wrong us isn't revenge or even forgiveness. It's the opportunity to become better than they were. And sometimes, the heaviest burden becomes the strongest foundation. I'm really wondering now, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Have you faced something like this before? Let me know in the comments, and while you think about it, I'm leaving 2 of the most loved stories from the channel right here on the final screen. They're full of twists. Don't miss them. Thanks for staying with me until the end.